It's happening. It's finally happening. Autumn is on the approach here in the Northern Hemisphere, and I, for one, could not be happier about it. Leaves are just suggesting that they're starting to turn, festive beverages are back in all the coffee shops, and Rhinebeck is just over a month away. It is the best time of year to be a knitter, unless you are in the Southern Hemisphere, in which case this is going to get really old really quickly. Sorry. Hello there, Pickles, and welcome to episode 29 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name is Caroline. I'm found more commonly over on Instagram and Ravelry as dunderknit. I'm a knitter working and living here in London, and if this is your first time joining us here in the podcast, a massive hello and welcome to you. A very quick word of warning up front, as ever, to remind you that this is a swearing-friendly podcast, and therefore the language, it gets a little bit colourful, a little bit adult. There are a few F-bombs that occasionally get dropped in, and so if that's not your bag, I totally appreciate it. This won't be the podcast for you, but thank you so much for checking us out. If you are, however, a returning viewer, hello, welcome back. I really hope you're all well. It is mid-September over here in London town, and as I mentioned right up front, autumn is starting to creep in around the edges. I am very excited about that. I'm coming to you 1 week later than usual. Those of you who've been around for a while will know I'm on a sort of every other week kind of schedule at the moment. However, last weekend I was celebrating the tail end of my birthday week, and so decided to take a slightly longer hiatus than usual. Thank you so much to everybody who popped on over to Instagram or Ravelry or even here on YouTube and wished me a happy birthday. I really appreciate it. I wasn't expecting it at all, but there was a massive just outpouring of birthday wishes, which I'm incredibly grateful for. I had a wonderful birthday week. I was able to enjoy time with friends, with family, and it was just really lovely. I have now reached the grand old and deeply unremarkable age of 36, and so far I can highly recommend it to you. It's not really much different from some of the other ages around about your mid-30s, and I am slightly clinging on to mid-30s rather than late 30s at this stage for as long as I can, but at the same time, aging's not really something that bothers me too much. I will say, since turning really sort of 30, 31, I've really enjoyed my 30s. They're pretty excellent all round. So yes, I would recommend 36. It is a good age. If you can reach it or reach back to it and re-invoke it in some way, I would highly recommend it to you. I know the last few weeks have seen a significant number of woolly festivals, trunk shows, all kinds of excellence in the knitting and crafting community generally. If you've attended one of those, I hope you had a fabulous time. If you've not and you've watched them all wistfully from afar, I can wholeheartedly sympathise with you on that one. I, for one, I've not been able to make any of the ones in recent weeks. However, we do have Rhinebeck fast approaching next month, which I am ludicrously excited about for all of the reasons. But in the meantime, I'm actually taking a brief trip next weekend, and it's not knitting related for once. So I know the Perth Festival of Yarn was on, I think, last weekend or the weekend before, and it was something that I thought about attending. However, I'm actually going to be back up in Scotland next weekend for a non-knitting related but still very fun kind of endeavour. So in the town of Stirling, which is about sort of 45 minutes to an hour away from Edinburgh, my hometown, there is every September a crime writing festival. That festival goes by the name of Bloody Scotland, and it is a brilliant event. Now, I am slightly biased in this regard on the basis of the fact that my mum was actually one of the original founders of the event, helped to set it up in its initial years, and since then has been going back on a very regular basis. I was also lucky enough to volunteer to help out there in its first year, and this is the first year, I think this is its 5th or 6th year, that I'm going to be going back and helping out again. So I get to go and help out with some of the stage management and the audio, and it is an absolute blast. I love it. There are some fabulous authors in attendance, so usually there are a range of different talks from the likes of Val McDermid, Ian Rankin, and we've had Joe Nesbo there in previous years. It's very exciting. It is going to be a very full-on weekend, so if you happen to live in that part of the world, apologies in advance for the fact that I'm probably not going to be able to arrange any meetups or anything along those lines. I'm really just sharing it because, one, it is a truly brilliant event, and two, if you're in the market for a great time of year to see Scotland, and we know that there's no Edinburgh Yarn Festival happening next year, so, you know, September, also an excellent time. I mean, for the love of God, bring your midge repellent, because peak season for feasting beasties. But apart from that, brilliant time of the year to see a fabulous country. And obviously, if you are into crime writing, added incentive, I feel. So that is what I have planned for next weekend, and then beyond that, the weekend after, so next episode, it's almost exactly a year since I published the first Knitting Vicariously podcast. And that is fucking mind-blowing. Yeah, I can't even begin to kind of get into words exactly how just yeah, it's a very many lot. Not least because the reaction that I've had over the last year or so has been incredible. But yeah, it's heading up to a year. So I published my first episode at the very beginning of October last year, and just based on recording schedule, next episode will be the big podiversary, if you want to be a bit twee with your language and call it that. So yeah, that's very exciting indeed. And if that weren't enough means of bafflement for me, I recognise this week that we have hit 10,500 subscribers here on YouTube. And I mean, it caused me to stare into space for a good 30 seconds with really nothing to say for myself, which, given I managed to have a conversation with myself that is fairly lengthy, at least once every other week, to land myself completely and utterly speechless is fairly impressive. So thank you to each and every one of you for getting me to that point of complete and utter bafflement. And I genuinely can't express enough how grateful I am to each and every one of you. I know that we are coming up on our Gold Along that I will be touching on a little bit later, which is an opportunity for us to express a little bit of fun and solidarity around the community, this fabulous community that have pulled together off the back of this podcast, and the groups that we have over in Ravelry and the hashtags that we have over on Instagram. And so I'm just incredibly grateful to every single one of you, and I look forward to celebrating with you through our Gold Along. For anyone who is new, a very quick précis to see the Gold Along, or indeed the Glorious Gold Along to give it its complete name, is a knit along, craft along, sew along, any kind of make along that we are running in the run up to Rhinebeck next month. So the 19th of October, Saturday the 19th, there will be a meetup of people in person over at Rhinebeck. Exact details still to follow, but as part of that, in whether you be attending in person, whether you be attending vicariously and in spirit, I would love it if you were to craft something using a little bit of gold. We will touch on later just how broad my definition of that is, and it just means that we can come together in solidarity on that day. It also means that if you do happen to be attending Rhinebeck and are not super comfortable with the idea of coming up to a complete random stranger and just, you know, kind of leering into them and giving them a massive hug, I mean, I hope no one's comfortable with the idea of leering at someone. That's a bit creepy. Language may be a little bit misplaced there. Generally coming up and being very effusive and being given and receiving and hugging happening. If you're not comfortable with that, and I appreciate there are many that aren't, you are more than welcome just to flash a little bit of gold in my general direction, and we'll get a little bit of a nudge and a wink from there. So yes, that is the intention of the Gold Along, but it does mean that we've got the opportunity just to share that moment a little bit more broadly. So wherever you may happen to be on that Saturday the 19th, I would love it if you just flash a little bit of gold either in person or digitally, and yeah, it'll be our little communal Gold Along day. in spite of the fact it has been a little bit warmer, and perhaps helped by the fact that I have had an extra week away, I have got a more than usual amount of knitting for you. I was hesitant to say a decent amount of knitting because I'm still not quite into the full throes of it. However, I will say the slight change that we've seen in the weather has definitely piqued my knitting mojo again. I felt it coming for a little while, so to speak, filthy minds, but it was starting to edge towards, oh hello, and then this week properly full into it, absolutely peaking, and all of the sweater knitting I want to it's pouring out of me. So yeah, very excited about that. And also the fact is, your Goldalong entries, your Vicarious knits over in the thread, and your actual knits over there as well, all of which can be found in our Ravelry threads, so please do take a look over there. We have the Knitting Vicariously podcast group over on Ravelry. It's also where you'll find show notes for this episode. Likewise, you will find some show notes on the Knitting Vicariously podcast account over on Instagram as well. Just to mention, all of the inspiration that I've been taking from some of your entries, from some of your vicarious patterns, oh my word, it is tremendous. And therefore, I hope you enjoy this week's Knitterly episode. I don't quite have any FOs for this week, but I am definitely edging closer. So with no further ado, let me start on what I've been working on for the last couple of weeks. The first project that I have been working on will be no surprise to any of you who've been watching the last couple of episodes. It continues to live in my rather full looking Bird Street UK bag. I picked this up at Fibre East earlier on in the summer, and if you want to know a little bit more about Fibre East or Mr. B Yarns, I would highly recommend you pop back over to my Fibre East vlog. But in the meantime, I have this fabulous vintage camera bag from Bird Street UK, and in here I have my Shifted sweater by Justyna Lurkowska. I'll put it up here on the screen just to remind you, for anyone that has forgotten. I mean, I swear I see this sweater in my sleep at the moment, the extent to which A, I've been working on it, and B, I really fucking want the finished version of this sweater, but it's getting there, it's getting there. So you will recall the fact that this is a sweater that Justyna Lurkowska, so Letters Knits over on Instagram, she posted a picture of it over a year ago, and I engaged in a gentle strategy of loving harassment to encourage her to hopefully publish the pattern so that I could knit the pattern, because she has a shifting sweater, which is a raglan version of it, slightly closer fitting. I knit that version back in, I want to say like 2014-ish, maybe? There or thereabouts, maybe slightly later, maybe 2015. It's one of the first sweaters that I knit, and I knit it because a bunch of people that I was friends with on Ravelry, having never met them in real life, they were knitting that to head over to Rhinebeck, and we do a thing every year where we pick a sweater pattern, we knit it, and together we form a bit of a rainbow. Now, I was very much attending Vicariously at that point. There was no way that Rhinebeck was on my immediate agenda, but this is one of the first sweaters that I knit with the intention of knitting along with my group of friends. So seeing that the Shifted sweater came out, the pattern for that, it's a drop shoulder shape, it's slightly more flattering on me in terms of its fit, and I was totally suckered in by the colour, as we've talked about previously. So I have been knitting this out of Madeline Tosh BFL DK in the glazed pecan colourway, and you'll see it's pretty close to the original colour. You will also see, hopefully, that I've done quite a bit more on it, because look, I've got a sleeve and everything. So here we are. This is my Shifted sweater. The body is done. I think last time you saw it, I was up to about here on the body. So I have knit the front, I have knit the back panels, which you can see, and I have picked up and knit down one sleeve in its entirety. Obviously all the ends are still to be woven in. I'm not that kind of a knitter. I don't weave in ends as I go. And I have also picked up and started the second sleeve over here. It's only a tiny little nubbin of a sleeve, but we are getting there. Let me hold it up so you can appreciate this colorway and these cables in all of their beauty. It is all over cabled, however I will say that the cable pattern itself is very, very simple to follow. It's pretty straightforward to get into a rhythm with it, both in terms of when you do the cable twists and in terms of the knit stitches and purl stitches, because as you will probably see, there are some purl stitches in between all of the different cables, and it's a really nice rhythm of a sweater. I didn't actually get too bored of knitting all the cables. I know that a few friends have found it a bit sloggy. I found it alright, actually. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've had days where I haven't picked this up at all, but I haven't found it too bad. The sleeves are also fairly quick to zip through on the basis that they are drop sleeves, and therefore in terms of the length, it is a little bit shorter than you would see if it was a full sort of set-in sleeve length. You don't have the sleeve cap to shape. There is a little bit of short row shaping, there we go, in the sleeve here, but a very, very little bit compared to a regular sleeve cap. And yeah, knit straight down. I did a spot of helical knitting on the arms, so for all that you can see it's a little bit stripy, I mean there is a fair bit of variegation in the glazed pecan colourway that I'm using. A little bit less by the time I got to here, because this was then just one skein, whereas this was alternating with it. By the time I'm wearing it, you won't be able to notice the difference. If you can, fine. I'm not that fussed. I mean, maybe don't point it out to me, because that's just kind of rude, but at the same time, I think it is more prominent on the camera than it will be in person. So yeah, I just have the second sleeve to go, which I should be able to bust out reasonably swiftly, and then the neckband, so I will pick up and knit the neckband here. In terms of skeins, I think I am at the end of my 4th skein of yarn. So in terms of the colourway itself, it is around about 250 yards, 225 metres to a skein. So I should be able to finish this in its entirety in around about 5, maybe just breaking into that 6th skein. I'll see how I go. So really, really good considering it is all over cables. It looks a little bit on the small side at the moment, but that is the cables that are cinching it in. I think I mentioned last time that I am knitting the size 45, I believe. And so I'm expecting that it will block out a little bit bigger when I block it a little bit aggressively. Someone did ask me on a previous episode if I would demonstrate the way that I go about blocking my garments. I will certainly endeavour to do so, either pictorially or I'll try and take a little bit of footage around it. Obviously it won't be this weekend, but certainly at some point in the future I will endeavour to do that. Broadly speaking, I'm going to soak it, and then I have some sort of foam mats, the ones that have the slight kind of jigsaw edging. I have some foam mats that I will lay it out on. I will then just pin it in place. I do have some blocking wires. I may end up putting those down the sides just to make sure it is staying as flat and as kind of straight as I would like it to, but it's definitely going to need a little bit of an aggressive block just to make sure it hangs rather than clings in that regard. In terms of needles, I think the body of the sweater is knit on 4mm needles. I used my Chow Goose for the vast majority of that. Oh, going rogue, I'm losing some stitches on the corner here. Let me just pick those up. But as is my preference, I am using some, I think it's 12-inch circulars here on the sleeves. I much prefer using smaller circumference needles to knit smaller circumference areas of sweaters and indeed hats. So anything like socks or sleeves or even hats, I tend to knit on anything between sort of 9 to 16-inch circulars. Because of the way that I knit, it means that I can zip round in a circle and not worry too much about having to faff around with magic loop and pulling needles backwards and forwards, as is not my preference in the slightest. But honestly, do what works for you. I did have to pick up around the edge of the sleeve here. You can see that I have tried to make it consistent on both sides, so there is a little ridge on that side there where I picked up in the middle of two knit stitch, or middle of one knit stitch rather, and I have done the same over on this side. Get my end out of the way, for goodness sake. And you can see that I have picked that up there. In hindsight, I could have picked just the other side of that and managed to do away with the line, but I actually quite like the line. I think it's a nice visual effect. And yeah, that is pretty much where I'm at with this just now. I am fairly hopeful that I will have this finished for the next episode. I do say hopeful as opposed to confident. Let's be very clear about that. But yeah, I'm getting there, and I'm definitely going to have this in place for Rhinebeck. Very excited. So that is my shifted pullover. Now, I've actually got another work in progress. Now, I know, before you say anything, Caroline, honestly, you really should be a bit more monogamous. You've got a sweater that you need to be knitting for Rhinebeck, and you really need to knuckle down with that. And I would say to you, absolutely, categorically, you are correct with that. But I'm also nothing if not ambitious / a bit of a chronic overachiever. So what I'm doing is knitting a second jumper for Rhinebeck. I mean, in fairness, this was the plan all along. I was really hopeful that I was going to be able to knit 2 sweaters for Rhinebeck this year. And it has meant casting on another sweater as opposed to picking up one of the myriad of sweaters that I have been working on previously and that some of you have been asking about. Apologies in advance for that. However, this is a sweater that's been in my queue for the longest time. It's a sweater that a very good friend of mine, who is Connie, hello Connie, has knit and was incredibly effusive about as a pattern. It's also a sweater that she knit for Vogue Knitting Live earlier on in the year. She posted about it over on Instagram, and in the end she chose not to go to Vogue Knitting Live. It was at a point in time where the discussions around racism and diversity had recently come to light, and it was a very, very intense time on social media and obviously outside social media, particularly for people of colour who were, I think to a certain extent, really feeling a little bit scrutinised and under the spotlight, and I know that those are some concerns that Connie herself voiced at the time. As part of that, a few of us decided that we really wanted to knit a sweater to match Connie's, and so I have cast on the Farmhouse cardigan by Amy Christoffers. I'll put a picture of it up here on the screen for you to see. As you can see, it is a gloriously cozy and squishy looking cardigan. Between the texture, the raglan sleeves, the little pockets on the front, it is an absolute beaut of a cardigan. Now, I was thinking long and hard about colourways and the yarn choice for this. I had some incredible bright electric blue in my stash that I was very, very tempted to knit with. It is Neighbourhood Fibre Company in their Studio Worsted, and it is the most gorgeous, stunning purpley blue colourway. I thought about that long and hard, and in the end I figured my gauge was going to be ever so slightly off with it. So I did a little bit more stash hunting. I went through and looked at some of the options that I had, and in the end landed on some truly vintage stash. This is yarn that has been in my stash since about 2011, 2012. I know, it's ridiculous. The yarn that I'm using to knit my Farmhouse cardigan is in a skein that is roughly equivalent to the size of my head, and that is no exaggeration. It is Cascade Yarns Eco Plus in the colourway 8462, which I think is like a cypress or an evergreen or something along those lines. However, I do want to address right up front, Cascade Yarns as a brand is, to coin a phrase, problematic as fuck, right? They have been in a significant number of conversations, dialogues, diatribes. Essentially, their stance is not particularly a helpful one. They are incredibly racist. There's been reports of them being outwardly homophobic, and it's a very problematic brand. I'm very conscious that in knitting a cardigan out of this that is in support of my friend that talked about how uncomfortable she felt being a woman of colour and going to an event like Vogue Knitting Live, that is a little bit of at least a sort of irony, if not appearing to be downright kind of undermining the position. What I'm trying to do at this point is, one, make use of yarns that I've had in my stash for a very long time, but also two, try and find a way of using some of these yarns for good, because Absolutely, I could go and I could throw all of these out, I could put them into D-stashes, but I think ultimately these guys have my money already. That's not going to hurt them. So with that in mind, what I'm trying to do here, and I appreciate there may be plenty of you out there that disagree, but I'm looking to try and use these yarns in a way that I am comfortable using them, so in support in this instance of a very good friend, but also, you know, I want to make it incredibly clear that in using these yarns, I'm not necessarily endorsing the companies themselves. I'm very aware that when I have a podcast and I'm talking to a group of people, it can sometimes come across as that. So essentially, I am trying to be transparent about what it is that I'm using, trying to use the yarns themselves for what I consider to be something that is worthy, and at the same time making my own position quite clear. Again, if you do disagree with me, I absolutely appreciate that. I'm just trying to find a balance that works best. So this is yarn that I bought many years ago, funnily enough, when I was doing some work in and around the Toronto area over in Canada. There were a couple of fantastic knitting stores out there, and I can't remember off the top of my head which one it was that I bought this yarn in, but I did remember going into the shop and being completely overwhelmed, and instead therefore choosing something that was going to really struggle to fit in my suitcase on the way home. And I do vividly remember having to sit on my suitcase to get it to close. But yes, this is the yarn that I'm using at the moment. I have made a little bit of progress, not very much. So the pattern has you work up your pocket linings first, and so I have these two little squares that are my pocket linings first and foremost. They also act as a bit of a gauge swatch, which I think is very cunning indeed. The pattern then suggests that you move on to the sleeves, which I will be using for some travel knitting. I'm actually thinking about using those as my travel knitting when I go up to Scotland next weekend, but therefore in the meantime I decided to cast on the body of the sweater itself, and I have just got past the ribbing stage, so there is not very much to see here. This yarn is turning out on the camera much bluer than it is in reality. In reality it is a very strong kind of forest green colourway, but I'm conscious it's coming out a bit of a weird tealy blue, so apologies for that. But I am knitting the size, I believe I'm knitting the size 44. I am also, somewhat controversially, not including buttonholes. Now, there are plenty of people out there who look fantastic in buttoned up cardigans. I, however, am not one of them, and while I thought long and hard about do I want to give myself the option of having buttonholes, in the end I decided against it, partly because I'm never going to sew on bloody buttons. That's my trouble, is I will never get round to it, and even if I did, I would never use them. I tend to like my cardigans just kind of left hanging a little bit open. If I do want to wrap them around myself, I will probably just pull it to wrap it around myself, rather than buttoning it in any way. So I just thought, to hell with it, why not? But yes, I have just finished the 1x1 rib. I am on the very first row of the texture of the cardigan itself. I did do an alternating cable cast on here at the bottom. I've talked about this one before. It is my preferred cast on for hats and for any 1x1 ribbing. It just means that you can get a really nice effect that is tremendously stretchy, look at it go, without needing to be quite as faffy as a tubular cast on. So, little cheeky tip for you there. Do love an alternating cable cast on. There are these garter edges here for the notional button bands, but we've established not actually button bands. So that is there on this side, and yeah, it is knit on 5.5mm needles, both the ribbing and the body of the sweater itself, because the body of the sweater actually incorporates a broken rib texture, so it's the same needle size throughout. As I mentioned, 5.5mm needles, which is a US size 9, so it is going reasonably swiftly. I have my chow goos, which are my personal preference in terms of needles. It's the first time in a long time that I've knit with the large size of chow goos, so by that I just mean that the interchangeable sets, there are two separate sets. There's a small needle set, which is from I think a sort of 2.75 up to a 4.5mm, sorry, a 5mm needle, which is a US size 8. and then 5.5 upwards to, I think they go up to like a 10mm size. That is the large cable. So the cable that comes here, it has two different size attachments. This is the larger one of the two. Let me hold it up so you can see it. There we are. This is the larger cable join of the two. That is the Chogo needle in its entirety. And while you're here, you get a bonus shot of my little corner of craft progress keeper. It is a festive Starbucks cup, which is not entirely seasonally appropriate just yet. We're in pumpkin spice latte season as opposed to gingerbread latte season, which is, you know, also an excellent time of the year, to be fair. But it matched so perfectly with the colour of this yarn that I thought I would use that there. So between the larger needle size and the thicker yarn itself, I am hopeful that we should be able to move fairly swiftly on this one. So that's what I've been working on for the last couple of weeks now. In terms of other patterns that have caught my eye, oh boy, there have been quite a few. I've tried to refrain from going completely bonkers with this section, but certainly there are a few patterns that have definitely caught my eye in the last few weeks. The first of those I spotted over on Instagram earlier on this week. So we've touched on the fact that clearly I have a bit of a thing for the dropped shoulder shape. We've also touched on the fact previously that I do love a little bit of mohair thrown in for good measure. And so this pattern by Emily Louise really caught my eye. So this is the Cowgirl sweater, and as you can see, it is an absolute beaut. It is very simple. It is very, very reminiscent of the No Frills, apart from the fact that No Frills is quite a deep raglan structured sweater. So you've got very, very deep armholes with the raglan shaping. This is a drop shoulder sweater. So if raglans are not your bag, I know in particular those of us who are perhaps of the more endowed bosom tend to favour a drop shoulder shape over and above a raglan, but this is something that I think could work really, really nicely. In terms of sizing, it is not the most size inclusive of patterns. It is worth calling that out. So in terms of sizing, it ranges from about 37.5 up to about a 56 3/4, 57 there or thereabouts, but it does come with a recommended 6 to 8 inches of ease. In theory, you could get away with knitting one of the larger sizes with a little bit less ease to make it a little bit more inclusive, but at the same time, it obviously won't hang in quite the same way. So something to bear in mind if you're on the lookout for a sweater pattern along those lines. Another sweater pattern that caught my eye, and I do have to say, full disclosure, they're all sweater patterns this time because there is nothing like the crisp onset of autumn, or at least the lure of it, to get me thinking about sweaters, and nothing but sweaters. But you probably know that by now about me. There is a beautiful pattern called the Golden Horizon sweater by Tina Tse, and I will pop a picture of it up here on the screen for you to see. It is absolutely stunning. So it is knit with these fabulous bands of colour the whole way down it. It is incredibly well sized in terms of its inclusivity. So it comes with a recommended 2 to 5 inches of ease, and the smallest size is around about a 28 to 30 inch bust, whereas the largest size is a 60 to 62. So fantastic ease there. Indeed, on Tina's project page, the pattern page over on Ravelry, there are a vast array of models of all sizes, all shapes, and they all do such wonderful justice to this pattern. It is really, really wonderful. It's knit from the top down in DK weight and therefore is a super pattern for the autumn. It's also, I suspect, going to be one of those patterns that because of the striping every now and again, it's very it lures you in and it keeps you going knitting through that pattern. You always want to get to the next stripe. I know that this time last year when I was working on my stalactite sweater, that is exactly how I felt. You always kind of want to get to the next bit down, and so progress is just chipping along quite nicely. So yes, the Golden Horizon sweater by Tina Tse, and I know that that was called out in one of the Vicarious Knits thread by Tales of Yarn, so thank you so much for mentioning the sweater there. Another sweater to crop up over in that thread was mentioned by none other than Yelena, our fantastic moderator, and she drew attention to the gorgeous perfectly autumnal sweater that is Kelby by Kate Howland, and I'll put that up here on the screen for you to see. I mean, how could I not? Clearly, I've got a bit of a thing for green at the moment. Clearly, the model, red hair, green. I mean, it's an established thing. We all know that. And it's no gold, but I mean, green is an excellent second choice if you have to go down that route, right? But oh my word, the cables on this sweater are to die for. Now, it is knit in pieces, which is always a little bit of a slog for me personally. I love something that's knit either in the round or kind of can be constructed to be such, rather than having to deal with all the seaming afterwards. But I would be willing to overlook that for this sweater because it's beautiful. The cabling is only on the front, so the back is knit plain, which would certainly help you whiz through that a little bit more quickly. And it's just an absolute stunner. It is Aran weight yarn, so potentially a contender for the Kingston that I have in my stash. So I bought that at Rhinebeck last year. It is Jill Draper's Kingston yarn, which I think is a worsted rather than an Aran, but I might be able to play around with the gauge a little bit and maybe get that to work out. So that could be a strong contender for later on in the autumn. In terms of sizing, it does okay. There's 6 inches of positive ease that's built in there, and so it ranges from a size 44 up to a 68. 44 arguably is a little bit big for one of the smaller sizes, particularly for those with a smaller bust measurement of around about 30 or 32. So that in itself is perhaps not ideal. In theory, you could get away with knitting it at a smaller gauge, but obviously that's not preferable on the basis of having size inclusivity as a pattern that's designed for all sizes, right? But yes, so smaller sizes are going to be a little bit thin on the ground with this version of the sweater. And last but not least, for pattern prettiness this time round, Caroline on Ravelry, no relation, not talking about myself in third person for a change. The excellently named Caroline over on Ravelry called out a number of patterns in one of the Vicarious knits thread, and one of those definitely caught my eye. It is Prosecco by Tricot Design MCL. I'll put it up here on the screen for you to see. It is a beautiful, beautiful sweater with a fingering weight yarn and a mohair yarn held together to create that beautiful fuzzy texture, but it also has this fabulous just lace yoke section too. There are a few other sweaters out like this at the moment. Most notably and kind of all over the place at the moment is the Love Note sweater by Tin Can Knits, but I think this is a really lovely alternative. I really like the simplicity of the lace in there as well. It works really, really nicely. In terms of sizing, it does not too badly. There is 3 to 5 inches of ease built into the sweater itself, and sizing wise it ranges from 35 inches up to around about 55 inches. So in terms of inclusivity, there is perhaps a little bit more that it could be doing with at the upper end of that scale. I would say that if you're in the market for something at that end of the scale, you might want to have a look at the Love Note sweater by Tin Can Knits. I know that they have an excellent reputation for all things size inclusivity wise. But that's it for pattern prettiness this week. Well, I say that, but come now, the reality is we're only just getting started, because now we get to enjoy the absolutely incredible things that you have been working on as part of the Goldalong. This week, and in this week's episode, I will be focusing on projects that have been shared over on Ravelry, and in all honesty, good lord, I got to the point I had to actually restrict myself from putting in every single picture that was on there, because they're just so fucking amazing, and this grin is constantly plastered all over my face when I go anywhere near that glorious Goldalong thread over on Ravelry, because the way in which not only you are kind of all taking to knitting with gold and being equally broad in your definition of it, but also the extent to which there is so much positivity and encouragement going on in that thread. It makes me so deliriously happy, and honestly, if you haven't checked that thread out yet, I highly recommend it. 1, just for the inspiration, but 2, for the just positivity and glow that comes from spending a little bit of time over there. I absolutely love it. But to give you a very potted highlights version of that thread, I will take no more of your time and instead bump us straight along into our glorious goldalong calorie. It's the best, isn't it? Ah, I'm so happy. I'm genuinely a little bit speechless by it all. It makes me so incredibly pleased to see you embracing this. And the projects that you're working on, the sweaters, the shawls, the socks, the garments, the hats, just everything. It makes me so happy. Thank you as ever for embracing this. We've still got a couple of episodes to go before Rhinebeck proper, so we will still be continuing to keep an eye on some of the things that you've been working on. Please do continue to post either over on Ravelry or indeed using the Glorious Goldalong hashtag over on Instagram. I do keep an eye on both and it makes my day. But that is pretty much it for this episode. As ever, a huge thank you to every single one of you for watching, for commenting, for interacting in one form or another. I really do appreciate it. I am delighted that we are getting into proper knitting season. I am devastated for those of you that live in the southern hemisphere who are just starting to ease your way out of that, although for all I know, perhaps spring is your very, very favourite time of the year, in which case embrace it, enjoy it, and I hope you have a wonderful time of it. But in the meantime, it only remains for me to say I hope you have a wonderful rest of day, rest of week. I hope your knitting is keeping you happy and fulfilled, but if for whatever reason it isn't, I hope you have the opportunity to knit vicariously. Keep on keeping on, and I will see you again very, very soon. Bye. Looking forward to heading back up north of the board. What is this bit of hair doing? What are we, what? How is, where do you belong? What? No. The hair thing. Let's take a moment to go into this in a bit more detail. So yes, I have had my hair cut again. I had it cut a couple of weeks ago now, and my wonderful hairdresser, who I do love very dearly, made one of those comments that you think, oh, that's nice, and then it just stays with you for like 3 days, and by the end of the 3rd day you have internalized it to the point where you've taken a very different meaning out of it. The phrase that she said was, your hair is going to look so nice when it's curled. Oh, that was nice, because then she went and curled it, and then I went home and I was like, oh, it does look so nice. Wait, what? My hair is naturally completely poker straight, as in I will blow dry it. I will tip my head upside down, blow dry it. I'll turn my head back up. As soon as I've brushed it, it is this, the whole way down, and the entirety of my life I've tried to get it to curl with very, very little success. I have finally established the secret is twofold. One, straighteners instead of curling tongs. I know, this is a revelation to me. Straighteners where you turn it around the straightener and it makes curls. I am possibly the only person in the world who uses straighteners to curl her hair. Because sure, why not? Willfully obtuse. That's me all over. But the second thing, a metric shit ton of hairspray. So I have been testing and trialing my way through trying to make these kind of curls a more kind of regular staple, and mostly it's because I now fear my hairdresser's disapproval. Now that in itself may sound completely ridiculous, but please allow me to tell you that my hairdresser's is on the walk between my house and the station. So every morning and evening when I walk past, the hairdresser's is open, and every time that I walk past, I imagine, entirely self-centeredly, that my hairdresser is in there judging me. I also wholeheartedly appreciate the fearfulness that I have over my hairdresser's disapproval is entirely ridiculous. But I am nothing if not an utter teacher's pet. I mean, you're not shocked by that, are you? No, I can tell.